All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the September 28th, 2021 UCTC Technical Committee meeting. My name is Brian Slack. I'm Principal Transportation Planner for the Ulster County Transportation Council. I'd like to call this meeting to order. I'd like to also apologize on behalf of our director, Dennis Doyle. He had a personal issue that he had to attend to. I expect him to be here momentarily, but in case he does get held up, let's just begin. I'm going to begin with introductions, and I will just read off our list of attendees right now for the sake of facilitating that. And if there's anyone whose name I do not call, please state your name after. So I have Mr. Chris Kate from McFarland Johnson, Diane Beidel, Eric Duden, Greg Krupp, City of Kingston, Herb Litz, Ulster County Legislature, John Schulteis, City of Kingston, Lizzie Phillip, New York State Thruway, Mary Beth Majestic, Town of Gardner Supervisor, Tom Baird, Barton and the Judas, Amy McKenzie, New York State DOT, Ed Pine, Ulster County. We have a few callers. Caller with the number 7682. Anyone? Caller with the number 5800. Last four digits, 5800.
Brian, that's me. It's Amy McKenzie. I accidentally didn't follow directions there.
No, that's all right. Thanks, Amy. And I see a caller, last four digits, 7546. Anyone? Okay, great. Thank you. Is there anyone I missed out there? All right, moving on. Call for citizens' comments. We can now open floor for citizens' comments if there are any. Hearing none, I'd like to move on to item number 3 on the agenda, approval of the May 25th, 2021 Technical Committee meeting summary. Could I have a motion for discussion, please?
Ed Pine.
Thank you, Ed. Can I have a second?
Amy
John
McKenzie.
Schulteis.
Thank you. I think Amy beat you, John. Open for discussion. Any discussion? Hearing none. Any opposed? Hearing none opposed, motion carried. And approved. Thank you. Communications and announcements. I have several, and if you don't mind, I'm just going to start with them. As some of you, most of you should know, you should have received correspondence from us last week and even the week before about UCTC's ongoing federal certification review. We're in the middle of that review right now. We kicked it off with our first day yesterday with an afternoon session with our federal partners at the FHWA and FTA. And there's a very rigorous and detailed agenda. We'll have on day one, it's the full TMA. So it's Dutchess County Transportation Council, Orange County Transportation Council, and Ulster staff all meeting remotely and answering a wide variety of questions on the federal planning process and how we're complying with it. As part of the review, each MPO has its own separate detailed review. It takes all day long. Today, I believe Orange County is undergoing their review. Tomorrow, Wednesday, will be UCTC's day-long review. As part of that, at 11 a.m., there is going to be a roundtable specifically intended for UCTC technical and policy committee members. It's a 1-hour Q&A with our federal reviewers. And if you are able in any way to attend this meeting for just a few minutes or for the whole hour, I would strongly encourage our members to attend and provide their input. The agenda is actually, it's very straightforward. It's actually, there's a survey form that is linked on the form that David is scrolling through right now. It's really a straightforward meeting, and they like to run through these 6 questions that they have. But the format is open-ended, and members who attend can provide any input that they'd like. I want to emphasize this is not a UCTC meeting. It is a meeting held by the FHWA and FTA, where you as members of the UCTC are invited. So I would strongly encourage you to attend that meeting if you can, and provide your candid input. And welcome, Dennis, to the meeting. We're under communications and announcements right now. Any questions regarding the UCTC certification review? This is a review that we undergo every 3 to 4 years, and it's a vitally important part of the MPO process.
Give him a.
I gave him a brief overview of the certification review process and strongly encourage anyone who's able to attend the 11 o'clock roundtable tomorrow.
Yeah, and suffice it to say, it'd be nice if you could say something about our ability to communicate and the benefits to the council, to your to the transportation future, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, the focus questions are up on the screen now, but again, I think you can comment on anything you're comfortable with. Other communications and announcements. For those of you who were interested in applying for Transportation Alternative Program funds, that deadline is tomorrow at 5 p.m. You should be, if you are applying, that application process should be well underway at this point, if not complete. So please be aware that that solicitation, the close date is coming to an end tomorrow, and then UCTC typically participates on the TAP review team as a partner of NISDOT. So I've been involved in communications with our state partners regarding UCTC's potential participation there. Are we expecting any other TAP applicants?
We're going to apply, right? You told them that.
Yeah.
The county is applying for a TAP grant. And Brian, you want to go over that?
Sure. That we're applying for roughly $5 million in total project cost to complete phase 1 of the Ulster and Delaware rail to trail project. We completed the feasibility study the UCTC did with Barton and LaJudas. That project was completed in June, the planning project. And Barton and LaJudas gave us very detailed cost estimates and design specifics on that project. So we're using that application, or I'm sorry, we're using that plan toward the application for phase 1. Phase 1 is from High Mount, essentially the entrance to the Bel Air ski area, where it meets the tracks there, all the way down to the Bel Air day use area. So that would include removal of the existing rail infrastructure and replacement with a roughly 8 to 12 foot in width crushed stone surface, as well as rehabilitation of 2 very significant historic bridges, one being Giggle Hollow, which can be viewed at the Bel Air day use area. So the total project cost is roughly $5 million, we're estimating, for phase 1. Complete build out is 3 phases. And we're estimating costs of complete build out to be just under $11 million going forward. But this is the most costly of the 3 phases. And if we are successful with this grant proposal, I think it's going to really be essentially get our foot in the door as the planning department to get this project completely built out within hopefully this decade.
Any questions?
Brian, how long is that first segment going to be?
2.5 miles.
Yeah, and it opens up the Bel Air Ski Center. It opens up the Bel Air day use area, and then the Bel Air, and then New York State DEC has acquired about 1,200 acres of forever wildland, and they have a unit management plan, and it opens up all of that 1,200 acres for hiking. So it's a great access point for all of those. And in addition, it provides a parking area up by High Mount, which connects to the railroad, the Delaware and Ulster Railroad, otherwise known as the DOR, that operates out of Delaware County.
Right, that it's important to note, and that's part of the agreement between the Ulster County Legislature for the future use of the UND corridor, that there would be train service in the future from Arkville to Bel Air, essentially at or nearby that trailhead at the Bel Air entrance. And if you want to see the plans are included on our website, and that's under the UND feasibility study. If you look under, I believe it's still listed under active projects. Do you want to mention something about the Ulster County Traffic Safety Board and
Yeah,
the
Sure.
county executive's recent announcement?
So the county executive recently announced that he's requesting that the Traffic Safety Board meet to discuss some of the safety issues associated with bike ped, as well as other safety issues within the county. In particular, some of that's related to the work that the Transportation Council has done with respect to the road safety plan. So that meeting we're working to schedule that meeting with the current coordinator.
She's on the call.
Of the Traffic Safety Board. There is a resolution that is in front of the legislature for consideration in October, which would appoint Brian Slack from this office as the coordinator for the Traffic Safety Board.
Yeah, and moving forward, we envision a total partnership with all the current members as the Traffic Safety Board has operated in the past, including Diane, our safety coordinator, Diane Beidel at Ulster County. I think this, assuming all the approvals go forward, we're going to essentially establish a new partnership and try to create a new organizational structure that will, I think, assist information dissemination and also facilitate cooperation between all the traditional entities. It's been hard to maintain participation and membership, and I know Diane can speak to that, and we've all struggled with that as members of the Traffic Safety Board in the past. But I think with some new insight as to the organizational structure, we can begin to chart a new course forward for the Traffic Safety Board and start things off with a fresh start. The board has not met since the pandemic began.
Well, thank you, Brian. Any other communications and announcements? I do have one other communication from the county executive. The county executive wrote a letter to NISDOT concerning the Brunswick Road and Route 4455 intersection. And that letter thanks NISDOT essentially for its efforts after we had reached out to them concerning the safety concerns for that intersection, and for their response, and in particular their response relative to getting getting beacons installed, flashing beacons installed, certainly by next year, early next year, and then moving towards a signal installation by 2023, which was expedited thanks to the efforts both of the county executive and a number of elected officials. We can provide
The
that.
resident engineer, oh, I'm sorry, Dennis.
And we can
The
provide
resident
that.
engineer-
We can provide that letter to the council. It just came out yesterday, I believe. There was a comment. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, Dennis. The resident engineer in Ulster County, Dave Corrigan, recently changed where the stop sign is at the end of Brunswick Road too, to try to help make it more visible.
Yeah, and we also mentioned that in the letter as well, that there was a stop sign change. Any other communications and announcements? Anything from the council members? Hearing none, we'll move on to new business. Thank you. New business, item A, draft UCTC resolution 2021-09. It's amendment to the UCTC fiscal year 2024 transportation improvement program. And it's to amend NISDOT project pin number 881451 as shown in attachment 1. Now I have a motion for discussion purposes. Anyone?
Ed Pine,
Thank you, Mr. Pine. Do I have a second?
John Schulteis.
Thank you, John. I have a motion and a second. Brian?
Yeah, sure. This is an existing UCTC pin. It's a NISDOT project. The purpose of the amendment, the change is of costs that are significant enough to require a full tip amendment, which requires 15-day public notice and comment period. So we're adding somewhere in the vicinity of just over $3 million to the culvert replacement project on state highways. This is multi-county project pin. And the additional funds are coming out of statewide program funds and do not necessarily require an offset to show fiscal constraint in this instance. But it is a full amendment. Therefore, if approved by members, we will move to advertise this amendment for 15-day public notice and comment period.
Any comments or questions?
This is down on 4455, kind of at the, I'm going to say the bottom of the hill, leaving town. And I met with the DOT a year or so ago. Is that where it is? in
That's
Gardner?
actually a different project. That's another culvert.
So the answer is
The two
no.
culverts. The two culverts in this project, one is on Route 32, just south of Jenkinstown Road. And the other one is on 299 at the, basically on the town of Lloyd, town of New Paltz line, crossing the Swart Hill Creek.
Thank you, Amy.
Any other questions? Comments? Any opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, it's carried. Thank you very much. Item B, it's a draft resolution 2021-10. It's amendment to the UCTC fiscal year 2020-2024 transportation improvement program to add a new NISDOT project pin number 814188 as shown in attachment 1. Can I have a motion for discussion purposes, please?
John Schulteis.
Thank you, John. Do I have a second?
Ed Pine,
Thank you, Mr. Pine. I have a motion and a second. Brian?
Sure, this tip amendment is a new addition to the UCTC tip. It's a NISDOT project directly related to the letter that was previously discussed during this meeting. It is for the design and construction of a traffic signal at the intersection of US 44 and State Road 55 and Brunswick Road in the town of Gardner. Total project cost is $426,000 estimated at this point in time. The fund source includes the Highway Safety Improvement Program, which is a federal fund source, and matching state dedicated funds. This project has been submitted to the UCTC in direct response to local concerns regarding safety at that intersection. And we're very pleased to see it being submitted. And again, regarding tip amendment procedures, this is a new project pin. Therefore, it requires 15-day public notice and comment period prior to UCTC policy final approval.
We had no comments on it. Am I correct?
No, this is technical.
I'm sorry.
We have not issued it for public comment at this time.
Okay. Any comments?
I'm sorry to be ignorant, but better to ask.
Can you repeat that, Supervisor?
A flashing beacon, is that a stop sign or is that just a flashing light? I don't know what that is. Can you not hear me?
No, we did hear you. Flashing beacon. Can you be a little more specific? What reference? I don't understand the reference.
Well, the flashing beacons will be installed, they're sort of a warning of an intersection ahead sign. Think of these somewhat to what you see as it relates to dangerous curves or as it relates to school zones, where they basically put these up to warn of the fact that that there's an intersection ahead and that it's cautionary in that nature. So that's what will be installed first. And then what will end up happening is it's because of where the signal occurs, the flashing beacons will remain in place to warn everybody of the signal ahead.
Thank you, Dennis and Brian.
Any other comments? I have a motion and a second. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, so carried. Thank you very much. And thank you to the department. Next item of business is number 6 on your agenda. It's other old business. Brian?
As I already previously mentioned, UCTC is undergoing its 2021 federal certification review. When that review is complete, it usually takes roughly 3 to 6 months for our federal partners to complete their review, and there are typically findings. We hope nothing significant, but it's a range of findings from corrective actions, which are significant, to recommendations, which are, as the name implies, recommendations for improving the planning process. So when that report does come out, we'll be happy to share it with our members and go over it, of course, in detail.
We hope that there are no corrective actions. That's our goal here.
Correct.
Any questions on that? Okay.
The next item I have under other business is the UCTC tip update and call for new locally sponsored federal aid projects. New York State DOT Albany Bureau has indicated that they will be initiating a tip update and providing guidance to MPOs statewide, all 14 of us, in January or February of next year. Those of you who have been participating with us for a while now on the technical and policy committee meetings know that the tip update process is an arduous one. It's no small undertaking by the MPOs. All MPOs statewide develop their new tips based on budgeted allocations from the federal and state government. We adjust existing project budgets where we are able and schedules. And also, if there are additional funds available, we do a call for new projects. We have never done a traditional call for new projects. I shouldn't say never. The UCTC has done them. I personally never had the pleasure of conducting a full traditional call for projects because we have been, over the course of the last decade, in a position where we've had to just move our legacy projects through based on the gradual flat funding, federal funding, or decline in federal funding. So we have not been in a position to add significant new projects beyond the FTA transit projects and the discretionary projects like Bridge New York or Transportation Alternatives Program and projects of that nature, Pave New York, things of that nature. So we're at a really interesting juncture where everyone is sort of waiting to see what happens in Congress. As I've mentioned in meetings in the past, it appears that what Congress is attempting to do is put forward a continuing resolution, essentially to continue the existing Federal Surface Transportation Authorization Act, which is the FAST Act. So that FAST Act and all the existing programs underneath it would just essentially continue
With more funding.
with more funding in this instance as part of the president's initiative to have a significant infrastructure bill. We've heard as much as 40% increase from existing funding levels. If that increase does happen, then we may be in a position where the UCTC can do a call for new locally sponsored federal aid projects. However, the pickle is that we traditionally, when we do a TIP update, start that update now in the fall. If we're waiting till January or February to begin that update, it does not give NPOs a lot of time to do a full call, solicitation, review, and then roll up, as we call it, of projects onto the TIP. So we're presently considering how to move forward. We're also getting advice in real time on our TIP selection criteria, which is the criteria that's used for selection of new additions to the TIP during our federal review. So there is a lot to consider right now when it comes to the TIP update, which has to be done by October of 2022. We need to have approved TIPs statewide by September 30th, 2022, to be in place October 1 of next year. So we would expect more guidance to be forthcoming. You will receive that from us, and we will receive it from NISDOT. Traditionally, in the past, we have formed a local TIP subcommittee, and we would ask those of you who are members who have had federal aid projects in the past, or who might be considering submitting federal aid projects, be they bridge or highway projects, or possibly other potential projects, that you would consider participating on that subcommittee. The role of subcommittee is to review the draft TIP and assist us as we begin that process of assembling a new TIP. Dennis, do you have any additional comments? That's my general overview of what to expect.
No, I think we're fine. The thing that I think that as a county we need to think about is that substantial areas of this county are rural in nature. And one of the things that we have some concerns about at the Transportation Council level is the number of off-system bridges that are owned by localities, and the ability of localities to essentially conduct that effort and that work within funding constraints. So now would be a really good time if you're thinking about or know of bridges that that you've had red flags on or yellow flags on. Now would be a really good time to reach out to your highway superintendents and have a conversation with respect to culverts and bridges, and begin to think about getting those off-system bridges on a TIP, or submitting them for TIP amendments, and also having a discussion, quite frankly, with your federal elected officials about the need for funding for rural roads and bridges.
Any questions on the UCTC TIP update? Again, more information will be forthcoming as we receive it.
Hearing nothing, we'll move on to locally sponsored federal aid project updates.
Typically, we like to use this segment of the agenda to discuss with our local sponsors on existing federal aid projects. If there are any questions or updates that they would like to provide, I'd like to offer that now. We otherwise don't have any specific questions at this time. Yeah,
Amy, is there any way that we could get a report out of local project units in terms of any concerns they have with respect to local projects?
Sure, I can ask them and email it to you.
We really appreciate that. And then we would reach back out to the sponsors and say what's going on. Thank you. Anything else? Any additional business before the council? Any council members have comments or concerns? So before we adjourn, I just want to say thank you to the UCTC staff, Brian and David. Federal aid audits Federal audits of a TMA are not simple things. This will go on all week in terms of joint sessions. It'll cover everything from Title VI to essentially public outreach. And preparing for this is not a simple, it's not a simple thing, and it's quite a bit of a burden on a small UCTC staff. So I just want to thank them for their efforts and let you know that we hope to come through this without any corrective actions. But you never know what surprises the federal officials will throw at you. So
Next UCTC meeting is scheduled for October 26th. Call for an adjournment.
Yep. Okay, any additional comments?
Help on Brunswick Road intersection.
Thank you, Supervisor. Motion to adjourn? Anybody?
Ed
Okay.
Pine.
Do I have Ed Pine? Anyone else?
John Schulteis.
All right. I have Ed and John. Any opposed to adjourning? Hearing none. Thanks, folks.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care, everybody.
Take care, be
Thanks,
safe, stay
everyone.
healthy.